Okay, well, we should. Oh, if I tell you what, we'll do. Yeah, it's only Dirty Rod who's not here tonight.
Roger is there. He is there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Roger's got special needs.
Yes. Getting at you.
And that'll be Andy, is it, turning up?
Yeah, good
And
old Andy. Yeah,
Oh, there he
Andy.
is, yeah.
Stop
Good
talking
old
about it.
Andy.
Uh,
Well,
mm,
we've got one missing tonight, Judith, isn't it?
who's not on here?
Oh, Judith's there.
I'm here.
Hang on a minute.
Where are they? The
Hang on.
shadows again.
Hang on. Oh yeah, David. Richard's not here, so that would have made it 10.
Who? Richard?
So
David Richard, Emma's dad.
yeah,
Emma's dad's not well. No
Emma's dad's not
excuse.
well.
No excuse.
So what I'm going to ask now is, have you got any news, wonderful Emma,
Not from me, my lovely.
my lovely
My lovely.
yeah,
Rawr.
I'm in I'm in a film production which they want me to be an absolute nut job.
No way.
So I can do that.
That'll be a stretch
Oh,
then, won't it?
Weirdly enough, at the film studio, there was a fire at the film studio today.
Yeah.
And like an idiot, I just stood there filming it and put it on my TikTok and YouTube, and then I realized, I thought, does this count as you're not supposed to be doing any film work? And I just thought, right, let's just not a good idea, so I just took it down. But the film studio was up in flames, except it was actually a company next door, and all the trees had gone up. It was bellowing black smoke. It was very interesting. Anyway, talking about very interesting, Margaret, anything you got to say?
No, nothing this week, I'm afraid.
Fair enough. Roger, what about you, Roger? The big question is, have I got a bigger nose than Roger? Have you seen that? Is it bigger than Roger?
I'm going to love you. No, it's not a mock.
Yeah, I am mocking. I am mocking Roger. Anything you want to say, Rog?
You're a mocking nuisance.
Nope, nothing
No.
you want to say.
I'll go onwards. I'll make up in a minute.
David, anything you want to say, love?
No, thank you.
What about you, Judith?
Tell me if you've heard this, because I thought it was a wind up.
No, it's rubbish. Right, next. Right, go on.
Apparently.
Yeah, can I just jump in? You know, I had a visit from these people who were searching for King Arthur and Jesus Christ the other week.
Both of them.
Oh, I didn't tell you this story. I'll have to tell you the story again. Right, Judith. Go on, Judith. Go on.
Right. I've heard that modern archaeologists now can't tell the difference between male skeletons and female skeletons because they're exactly the same. Now, do you know what I mean? Is that a wind up? I don't know whether it's true. They're teaching them in universities now that male and female skeletons are exactly the same.
No.
Right, let's just talk about this academically, right? There's been too many mistakes made by archaeologists based on the artifacts with the bodies, right? So I think what you're talking about, you should not assume the sex of an individual by the artifacts that they're buried with, for a start. It's absolute nonsense that you can't tell the difference between a male and a female body, because you can, right? And I've done so many presentations, and I thought, we got cremated remains of a little girl, and I'm thinking, well, it's not exactly much remains to go by. So technically, if you've got enough human remains anyway, you're able to determine whether they're male or female. So that's completely inaccurate, Judith.
Okay.
I've got to be honest with you.
Right, lovely, thank you. That was my news.
Well, they're probably that's probably a medical university they're talking about. They can't tell a difference between male and female because the person who's male says they're female. So there you go.
Okay, I'll do some more digging and see what I did there, and see if I can find anything else out.
Oh, talking about digging. I was I woke up this morning. I said to Michelle, I said, "Oh look, I gotta get out. I gotta get out to the land there." So I got out, jumped out the car, and I was excavating the stone cut ditch, right? But except I think I've got about another 2 meters to go before I get to the bottom, right? And that's as far as I can tell you. But I still haven't told you about King Arthur or Jesus Christ yet, which I've got to do before we do anything else tonight. Andy.
No, I've got nothing to add tonight. So.
Andy's always said he was a second coming anyway. Margaret.
No, you've already asked me, but I did go on an adventure with the National Trust.
Oh my bloody God, don't tell me it was charcoal burning sites.
No, it wasn't. It was looking for lots of different things.
Lime kilns.
What?
No, it wasn't lime kilns. It was
Rudolph Hess.
Quarries. We found 2 quarries, and we found potash kiln and clearance. Did I say clearance cairns? And an old well.
Clearance cairns, obviously building. Just as you're clearing the field, you're building a pile of stones.
Pile of stones, basically. Right. So we have to find them on a map. And it involves clambering down lots of ditches and hacking through undergrowth. So it's like an adventure. It's like being with the famous 5, which
there's only 3 of you.
You're just lacking the dog and the ginger beer.
The problem is with clearance. The problem is with clearance grounds is that people can mistake them for burial mounds quite easily.
Yeah. But they're all in a way that the undergrowth, the plant life is too high now, so it's difficult to find things. So we needed one of those GPS contraptions to find where we were. Yeah, so it's fun. It's good fun.
How did you know it was a potash kiln?
Because it was on our list of things to find. X marks the spot. So
yeah, but so what you're saying, you got to it and it said this is a potash kiln. Well done, brilliant.
But you have to find it. It just tells you on the form. It's all very complicated, but you have to try and locate it. But it's not always very obvious.
So in other words, you found the location, but right, okay, fair enough.
And then we have to report back to headquarters and tell them what condition it's in, and if it's in bad condition, why. But even if it's in bad condition, they're not going to do anything. So it's a bit pointless, really.
Well, the thing is, reporting back to headquarters in Berlin and only carrying out orders is just unacceptable. Right, Anne.
No, I'm very sorry. No.
And Drina.
No, not this week.
Well, I've had a few adventures this week, right? Because naturally, I've just come off set today, so that's fair enough. And that's why I'm in Bristol. Anyway, did I tell you about that little sort of old trackway that I was recording, and I'm putting a little bit of a plan together, and the way I did it was by spraying benchmarks on the road, and so I took all my measurements from the benchmark. It's very traditional. It was really good. I thought this is really impressive. I thought, wow, brilliant. So I did this wonderful plan, right? And then one of the neighbours comes up, and I'm thinking, right, he's going to complain about the sprayed benchmarks on the road. He didn't, right? Huh? This tied in with a story a few weeks ago, right? And basically, what happened, right? I was on the good old land in West Wales. I just turned up from South Wales. I was just there, and I was just making myself a cup of tea, and I thought, hang on a minute. I goes down to the fort area, which is what's on the map, but it's not a fort. And I go down there, and the next thing, there's this person on the other side of the barbed wire on the neighbour's property, shouting something, and I'm thinking, hang on a minute, why is he shouting at me? Anyway, I totally ignore him, right? So I go in to finish the tea, and the next thing, the alarm goes off, and somebody has jumped over the gate. I've told you about this, haven't I? That there's this woman talking to a tree. Have I told you that one?
think so,
Oh,
yeah. I think so.
Well,
Yeah.
Anyway, basically, I was talking to her via the security camera, right? And she was thinking that the tree was talking to her, right? Anyway, the next thing, from my side of the gate, this guy leaps back over, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I got intruders. So I go over there, right? And this guy's talking Welsh to me, right? And I'm talking back, and it is fine. And I didn't know, right? I didn't know that these people trespassed over my neighbor's land, right, to try and get to our land, right, and then basically these two people were saying to the neighbor, "Oh, you know, Carl Langford, we don't like him. We don't like what he's saying on YouTube. We don't, and we're trying to find out where he is." And my neighbor's going, you know, I'm going to a funeral, right? And they know everything about me, apparently, these people. Anyway, the next thing they turn up and they say, "Oh, we're searching for the burial place of King Arthur. We do believe it's here." And I'm thinking, "Oh my God, right, okay, fair enough." And then they're saying, also, when you find the burial place of King Arthur, right, you'll also find the burial place of Jesus Christ.
Why?
Hang on a minute, you all went quiet then. Exactly, that was basically, apparently, after Jesus left the cross, he came to West Wales, and he settled here, and he was buried in West Wales alongside King Arthur, who would come years later, knowing that King Arthur's come in, so he's going to be buried. But the reason why we got Jerusalem and Shiloh and Bethlehem in West Wales is that's Jesus. Actually, the whole story is based in West Wales.
I thought Jesus
heard
was
that
at
before.
Glastonbury Tour.
I'd heard that Joseph of Arimathea brought Jesus to West Wales.
Oh, I thought.
Yeah,
I'm not sure I believe it, but I heard it.
I know where he's buried because alongside King Arthur and Elvis Presley. But anyway, let's carry on. It's true. I can't make these things up. It's 100% true. Anyway, we're gonna crack on. The wonders of places. Right. So there's my wonderful Baldric. You know what? I am thinking about bringing Baldric on in the caravan up to Cumbria, and hopefully Margaret can feed him.
He'll like it in my garden.
That's fair enough.
Yeah.
And that there is Morgoth, the Dark Lord, our black cat.
Lucky black cat.
And there's the other one. That's Marley, the black and white cat. I thought I'd show you them. You know, it's all for the good of the country, right? So what we're going to do, we're gonna go back to where we were at the end of last week, right? And I just wanted to, we had just finished the Cordon Rig fields in Scotland, Scottish borders, and we were talking about the small fields, how it works out north of Edinburgh. And I remember saying last week that it's very, very likely that when the Romans got to Scotland, all the great trees that we're talking about in the Grampian Forest were actually not there because they were all these intricate field systems. So what I then left with us last week was this image. And I've written about this in my book, Romans in South Wales. And it's a site known as Blind Rhondda. And I just wanted to bring this to you because this is very similar to some of those sites in Scotland, for example. Stone boundaries, a little area was where there might be dwellings. And we know that this is one of two settlements because this is an enclosed settlement 2, right? In Blind Rhondda, which is basically a place known as the Regos in the Rhondda Valley, in the upper Rhondda Valley. And this is in an upland area. Now, it mentions the word unenclosed because what this is, you've got a largely spread settlement. And the only way of getting to this is by parking on the opposite side of the road and then crossing across a busy road, and you actually get to see it. But what you can clearly see is these large bits of boundary, right? And then what you then also see is sort of other structures which are in around the landscape. There's much more to actually see there, which isn't actually shown on the aerial photography. But this site itself is a wonderful example of what we've got in Scotland, where we've got buildings and enclosures where people are living, and you've got enclosed fields. And again, what do enclosed fields mean? Right? They mean you've got grazing ungulates, grazing sheep. Now, when it talks about unenclosed, it basically means that there's no big bank and ditch around the whole thing defending it because he didn't need it. And the other thing about this site is not only do we have evidence from the Iron Age extensively 100 years before the birth of Christ and beyond, what we do see, the reason why this is in my book, The Romans in South Wales, is because we've got Roman evidence here of occupation. And again, that Roman evidence of occupation points towards a continuity of people living from the Iron Age, and then what happens, you've got the good old Roman invasion, and the continuity itself is where you've simply got people just thinking, oh, right, we woke up, Jesus had been born, AD 43, the Romans are wandering around, AD 100, yeah, fair enough. And people just keep living there. They're not really affected by events that are going on. And what you can see when you do look at aerial views, you do get different angles of this site as one of two sites. The biggest problem is with this type of site is the way the walls are built. Now, what I'm going to do is just give you a little bit of an archaeological demonstration. Now, hang on a minute. Let's just draw on this screen, right? And the demonstration is when you build dry stone walls like this, and you try to pile them up, and what you might do, you might put a bit of a sod of earth there, right? And the grass grows out, and then what you might do is put more stones there, right? Chuck another sod of earth there, right? And then that keeps growing. But the problem is when you're building that way, when the sod of earth breaks down, and then obviously the beams for the structure. So obviously if we want to put a roof there, you got roof beams like this and so on. What happens is when the whole thing breaks down, because there's no mortar, there's no cement, right? They're not using any clay because this is sort of a sandstony area where you're not got really good clays, right? You do that in limestone, but not sandstony areas like this. And then simply what you've got, if we have this, you have just an array of stones that are like this, which are in fact like this. And the problem is when archaeologists are excavating things like this, it's really difficult to reconstruct walls that are like this, because they're not dressed, they're not hewn stone, they're not square, they're not angular stones. And simply the site is being left like this. And that's the way it is, and that's the way it will be. And the only way to preserve this site is, one, to try and make sure that people don't sort of move around the stones and stuff, right? The only way to really preserve this site is to actually keep sheep grazing on it. And then, because if you have trees with a site like this, you're going to start to lose it quite quickly. But personally, I prefer trees planted on it, but that's me. And again, what we've got is, I think this is quite useful for the likes of Margaret, who's doing some field work. So what you've got is, if you look here, very difficult to really work out. So what we're going to do is pick out these buildings here. Slightly a bit more difficult to really work out what's going on. And on the ground, it's really difficult to understand what's going on. But aerial photography really picks out these buildings really, really nicely. And this is very similar to when we're looking at landscapes in Scotland. In fact, if you look at that image there, squint your eyes and think, right, seen that before. So if we go back and we say, right, that's exactly what's going on in Scotland. So again, these are like rubbly built walls and so on. And interestingly enough, when I put my little video online today of digging the rock cut ditch, somebody, I know it all, got in touch and said, "Oh, that's nothing. That's nothing. That in Scotland, the old boundaries for these types of things, right? You get all these rock cut ditches like you've got." And I'm thinking, well, it's not exactly the same thing, right? How is it slightly different? So there we go. There it is in the Rhondda Valley, and you can get an idea where we just talked about. And there it is on the ground. So to really understand this site, you need to have an aerial view, right? And as you can see, this is really higgledy-piggledy. It's really difficult to really work out what's going on, and it'd be very difficult to reconstruct that type of site because of the way the stones are. And you do see this with lots of Iron Age sites and lots of buildings that have been built in this way. And you sometimes go to these sites. There you go, Hendramanith, which is basically the old hill town, the old settlement of Hendramanith. Again, in Blaen Rhondda. And again, looking at this and what we've got, we also think that this site has been altered and changed in more recent times. And when they excavated this site in the 1920s, I think it was, they did actually find some Roman evidence as well as lots of earlier evidence in regards to pottery and metalwork. And again, squinting your eyes and looking at that. So typical scene. Now, the big problem is when is history? How to understand history. And when is history? When it started, basically. And what I mean by that is that this landscape is not only, the buildings here, not only just an Iron Age landscape. It's got a Roman landscape, probably a bit of medieval, and probably more recent. So it's not one moment in time. So as I mentioned, Tim Ingold lots of times in the past where all the layers are intermingled, following the line, and it's all intermingled and built up. So that is a piece of history, but which is still talked, which is still presented its being since the Iron Age. And again, sort of coming to sort of the end of mentioning these field systems and how important they are, and obviously comparing the differences with the sort of, I love this image, I really, really do. It's an English heritage image. This is obviously an image of a medieval landscape. And this is the epitome of how things change, because if there was an Iron Age landscape here or a Roman landscape, what happened with the medieval period? They were really intense. So what had been there before has just been removed and lost for us to understand. And the only reasonable way of trying to find out that other stuff is there by digging occasional trenches, trying to find Roman pottery or Iron Age artifacts, and that would then give you an idea of the understanding of this landscape. Now, this is rather interesting. Again, this is Somerset. Somerset's not Salisbury Plain, Wiltshire. And basically, what we've got is that we've got a very complex landscape there. And it says what you've got there is an early landscape, a later landscape. You've got the plough areas, the black lines are going to be the plough areas of the medieval landscape, and all the little divisions, all the little fields. Some of them might be Iron Age, some of them might be Roman, all the red little sort of pastures of land. The past never ever looked like this as one moment in time. The past is never one moment in time. So obviously the black lines, you've got medieval, the browny sort of, those types of lines could be a bit of Iron Age, Roman, and all the rest of it. So again, trying to sort of understand what we've got going and look at that there. Now this is in Northumberland. It's sort of talking about prehistoric ridge cultivation, which is again Northumberland, which is on the borders with Scotland. And again, I mentioned that there were some open fields in Northumberland and southern Scotland, unlike the enclosed areas of Cymru, Wales and Scotland, because they have grazing sheep and goats, for example. So again, give you another demonstration of how things are different in different parts of the country. And looking at this, again, getting an idea of the complexities of what we're seeing, and you can get an idea there in one moment that there's thousands of years worth of history there, thousands of years worth of division, controlling the landscape, understanding the landscape. And again, that goes all the way back to the Bronze Age. And this is Dartmoor. And what you can clearly see there, it's these Bronze Age the systems that we see in the Iron Age were being developed in the Bronze Age. There's a Holmmoor, Dartmoor, and they're talking about a reeve system, where you've obviously got the drainage, and this itself demonstrates again a prehistoric moment in time, where again small parcels of land, and the drainage is obviously not just the ditches around these things, and not just to try and assist, for example, the let me get my words out. The drainage there is not just only to sort of assist the drainage around the side, to obviously stop your animals getting into what's going on with your farming. And again, it's sort of saying, you know, these complex field systems and Salisbury Plain. Now, the one thing about having Salisbury Plain, which is a militarized landscape, everything was sort of frozen in aspic in 1939, and earlier field systems, which hadn't been destroyed by modern intense farming methods, are still there today, other than tanks going over them. So obviously you've got this sort of complex weave of these little organized bits of landscape, really higgledy-piggledy. But again, nothing like this ever existed at one time. Nothing ever was like this. This is not one moment in time. It's a mixture of moments in time. And again, Northumberland, again, one thing that nobody's mentioned, and one thing that I've not mentioned, is what you can see is that the landscape is sort of disjointed from what we can see in the archaeology. One minute you've got a lot of agriculture, and the next minute field boundaries, and the next minute you've got nothing. Right? It's just the horses for courses, how people wanted to use the landscape. And it might have been, for example, that people didn't have enough stones to sort of make loads of different stone walls, and that little area that you've got there is good enough for your agricultural purposes. And there we go, Somerset as well. What they're saying as well, like the Iron Age, in the medieval period, they may have had small little fields like the Iron Age, you know, where you've got most of the medieval landscape. What you've got, most of the medieval landscape, you've got these big fields with sort of ridge and furrow everywhere, right? And then on top of that, you've got areas where you've got irregular little fields, pockets of land, because they're obviously doing sheep grazing in certain areas. Up in Derbyshire as well, what we've got, it's saying Bakewell, grid-like straight edge fields, probably the result of large-scale work to enclose the landscape in the 1700s, overlie medieval lynchets. And what basically medieval lynchets, there we go. Yeah. So what these are, here is that they're steps. So in other words, erosion is going downhill, so you've got soil creep. So when you've got soil creep, it builds up a bank, and you've got more soil creep from behind. It builds up a bank, builds up a bank, builds up a bank. This is not step ploughing. This is the way that the landscape has actually created itself and been part of this changing this changing thing, this changing world. Now we're gonna look at this quickly in a few moments and look how things have changed, and look at this little table. It's a very, very useful table. And it's basically saying here, I just thought I'd share this on the screen. So the earliest field systems, although cultivation undoubtedly took place at an earlier date, these field systems, the organization of the field systems really started to come in about 3,700 years ago. For example, on Roughtor Downs on Bodmin Moor, Cornwall, appear to be earlier than early Bronze Age cairns that appear to be superimposed on them. So what we're talking about, one thing that we can work out is sometimes you can get a landscape of ridge and furrow. You can get a landscape of agriculture, right? And then say from the Neolithic period 5,000 years ago, and then lo and behold, the Bronze Age comes in. So what they're doing, they might put a stone circle in the middle of where your earlier ploughed field is, right? And then what you might do is you might have a Bronze Age burial mound on the landscape. And there's one thing about that, when you've got, for example, let's just do a bit of drawing, get rid of that. When you've got, for example, a bit of sort of early sort of, say that's a Bronze Age, an iron, start again. So that's a Neolithic landscape dating from, say, 5,000 years ago. So Bronze Age comes in, what they do is that they build a mound, right? And they cut into it, put their little bit of their cremations in there, right? And what that does, what happens then is that as this all gets flattened out due to modern farming, right? What is left is this here, the original Neolithic landscape. And this is really, really important to that when you're digging into these mounds, you get earlier landscapes preserved. So it's all relevant. It's all food for thought. So physical evidence for earlier cultivation is limited to the remains of hard marks beneath Neolithic monuments. And obviously ploughing even beyond the Bronze Age, even beyond the Neolithic period. And this is really, really interesting that deposits of plough soil have been excavated from ditch fills of Neolithic long barrows, pointing to cultivation before 4,000 years ago. At sort of, way before the Bronze Age, way before the Neolithic. And cultivation is also seen, that there are tillage marks at Hambledon Hill in the Neolithic period, underneath what's left of the Bank of Ditch enclosure, Hambledon Hill. So this is all really, really important stuff. Now, on here it says it is probable that organized land divisions, including field systems and linear boundaries, were introduced or developed alongside other transformations in social and cultural life evident towards the end, roughly around 3,000 years ago. And what we're talking about, more field systems there, and trying to work out all these wonderful things. So we've got this wonderful patchwork of landscapes which have been divided and then reorganized, big open fields. And so this is all changing bits of the landscape. And then what we've got is how we try to work out this world. Let's just take a few things. So people have been dividing and controlling the landscape. There we go. Far back as 6,000 years ago in Britain, even longer than that, even into the Mesolithic period, maybe as far back as 8,000 years ago. And I think the point made is that piles of stones can ruin an archaeologist's reputation when they say it's a burial cairn, when in fact it's a pile of stones in a field. Can I tell you a little bit of a story, right, which links in with what Margaret said? I've got a photograph, right? I was The archaeologist is now retired, so can tell the story. In the late 1970s, there was a lot of money wandering around, and it meant that archaeologists could do lots of work. Because of the manpower services scheme, they got lots of volunteers who were paid by the state to do archaeological work, and they had so many sort of paid manpower services scheme volunteers at one stage that the archaeologists were just trying to find archaeological sites for them to work on, right? And there was this one farmer. He went up to an archaeologist one day and said, right, there's a pile of stones in the middle of the field. And the archaeologist didn't understand that that pile of stones in the middle of the field could actually be built up stones into a cairn, which was a farmer moving stones off his field. They want a burial there, right? And the archaeologists were working there with a team of like 20 people. And then eventually the guy's boss contacted him and said, well, found any evidence? He said, no. And he said, well, for us to get more funding, you've got to find evidence, right? You've got to make it into a burial mound. You've got to make it into a stone burial mound, into a cairn, a proper cairn. So basically, in his report, he eventually said, yeah, definitely a burial mound, right? But we just run out of time to excavate it. And they had more funding for that. So they made up a cairn in the middle of a field on the official records. So it's very important when you go out, Margaret, to be very wary of your archaeology, because it's not all there to do wonders. Sometimes it's just a pile of stones in a field and there's not a burial there at all. So anyway, back to this. So what you can see there is that unenclosed fields. So what you've got is you have got enclosed, as we've demonstrated. You've got unenclosed and enclosed fields. So it's not actually that we've actually said that, haven't we? It's actually not on you. We've showed enclosed fields in the Iron Age, but it's not actually on here. And we've also shown unenclosed fields that are actually not on here either. Oh God, this isn't a very good table at all. But what I think the demonstration of this table is that it's not showing what I wanted it to show. I thought it did. Anyway, so what we've got enclosed and unenclosed fields in the Iron Age. We got what we've got in the medieval period. We've got lots of unenclosed fields, as we've basically mentioned, and there's lots of changes to the landscape. Next time, remind me to look at these charts a little bit better, because it's completely not what I wanted to show you. There's a nice oak tree. So what we're going to do, we're going to move back to Morgoth, the Dark Lord.
Oh,
and there's Marley. And there is Idris. Oh, Idris. He got tangled. Shut up, Rog. Idris got tangled up the other day. His front his front hoof got tangled up, and he's got a bit of swelling. So I've had to put him in a little shed to look after himself. Right. Now we're gonna do some wonderful lookings at some charcoal burning, right? And is that going to show? Right, I think that's okay. Yeah. So I've got my charcoal burning notes, and it's all thanks to Margaret, I think, who got us onto charcoal burning this week. So blame Margaret if this goes wrong.
Oh dear.
Thanks, Rog. Thanks. That makes me feel wonderful, Rog. It really does.
Okay.
Thanks, Rog. So what we've got, we know, for example, if we take evidence from the continent, which then chucks us over to understand what we've got going on in Great Britain, we've got at least 2,500 years of charcoal production in places like the Netherlands, in places like Belgium and Germany. And the chronology and typology of charcoal kilns and their relation with early iron production is quite clear. Now, one thing one thing with this chart, much better than the last one. It makes sense. So what you've got at the bottom there, I think the bottom bit of this chart, and you can take this as being very similar to what we've got in Great Britain when we're looking at charcoal burning sites, because what you've got is charcoal burning sites might be found by chance, right? And usually what you've got is they're very clear ones in the medieval period, which can usually be found by LiDAR and field survey. But it's very likely that you can get Iron Age and Roman charcoal burning sites found via archaeological excavation and other means. So now what we've got, the process of why we need charcoal in the Iron Age is for forging iron. So what we mean by that is that we've already produced the iron in our little furnaces, right? In our little furnaces, a nice bit of iron. So then what you've got the hammer. Let's start again. You've got the piece of iron that's come out, and you've got to hammer it into your knife, your sword. So charcoal is used in the forging to rapidly heat up the piece of metal to be hammered. And there you go. In the Roman period, probably at the end of the Iron Age as well, what you've got is bloomery, the actual usage of charcoal, enough charcoal to get the temperatures that you needed beyond 1,490 odd degrees C, where you're actually using charcoal to melt iron. And obviously, we're looking at the medieval period. The monks gave us blast furnaces, right? Oh, can I give you a little fact here? Right, this is a really interesting fact, right? Probably never mention it to you again. Blast furnaces were actually invented by the monks, right? And we've got evidence of that. And there's a point to be made here with the dissolution of the monasteries. The monks were like in control of lots of woodland and so on. And the monks were involved in mining. They were involved in metalworking, alms for the poor, loads of different things. The monks had a thing in everything, right? The monks were the Roman miners of the medieval period. And when they're mining, they're producing ore as well. And there's coal around as well. So charcoal and coal are being used in blast furnaces in the medieval period in regards to monasteries. Right now, this is a key fact. I'm actually a big fan of what Henry VIII did to the dissolution of the monasteries on another level, which we'll talk about that another time, right? But if Henry VIII didn't dissolve the monasteries, the Industrial Revolution in Europe would have occurred about 150, 200 years earlier, because of the blast furnace. The monks developed blast furnaces, but they were just on the beginning of the technology. It was a bit like the Nazis with the V2 rockets at the end of the Second World War, and their Messerschmitt 262 fighters and all the rest of it, and the jet fighters and so on. It was too late for the Germans to do anything with it. The point being is that if the blast furnaces had been allowed to develop by the monks, the Industrial Revolution would have occurred 150 years, 200 years earlier, and therefore, people, we would be talking to you now from Mars. We'd have probably been on Mars by now, right? And things would have been very different. So that's one thing that, the blast furnace was the thing that has given us all of modern day technology. It gave us Telford's Bridge. It gave us the Titanic. It gave us all these different things. It gave us tanks. Yeah. But I just want to check that fact into you. So one thing that Henry VIII got wrong was dissolving the monasteries and closing down the blast furnaces, which didn't come back for another 100, 150 years. So there we go. and the Bessemer process and all the rest of it, that's something else. So what we've got is this other thing here that when we're looking at identifying the charcoal burners, and obviously blast furnaces are going to use lots of charcoal, as bloom roof furnaces as well. So what you've got is that identifying basically the small holes in the ground, right? The rectangular pits in the ground, clamp kilns, and these are square or rectangular. And then when they get round, they're usually Roman, early medieval, Anglo-Saxon, or medieval. And the idea of having square pits seems to die out, because when you go to the Forest of Dean, they're round kiln pits, clamp kilns at the Forest of Dean today, and you've got mound kilns. So these are sort of big sort of mounds outside, where you just stack the wood, and you've got a little hole in it, and then you cap it over, and then you set light to it, and it smoulders over days, like that. That's that's a cross between a burning clamp kiln and what we've got with these mound kilns here. So I wanted to, I've got some, I actually haven't read my notes at all yet, so I think I need to go to my notes. So the study of archaeological remains of charcoal kilns is now a much faster growing field of research. And the history and evolution of different types of prehistoric charcoal production features still poorly on the archaeological PhD diary, but more and more people are actually looking into charcoal burning. And it's not just creating charcoal for the sake of it, right? It's what you burn, because we actually in West Wales, we've actually got gorse wood, and gorse wood burns at a very high temperature because it's got lots of oil in it, and it's something that is really sought after. So in the Forest of Dean, they're going to be burning the likes of oak, and probably your birches and your hazels and that type of thing. And so different wood creates different temperatures as well. So it's quite a science. It's not just chuck a load of wood in, stack it up, and cap it over a samel, sort of have a hood over it, right? Yeah. So the point is that it's the science of what wood you use, right? And that's really, really important, because different wood burns at different temperatures. And again, we're starting to we're starting to see sort of movement from rectangular to round pits. Eventually, there we go. So what we've got, the size of the charcoal pit kilns decreases in the Roman period with the use of mound kilns. The volume of production charcoal dramatically increases. The problem is with having having a pit in the ground, right? It's a lot more work. But if you have it above the ground like this, right? And there you go, that's one here. And then what they've got, they then put earth on top of it, right? And what happens when you put earth on top of one of these wonderful charcoal burners, right? It restricts the flow of oxygen. And this is the point. You need to restrict the flow of the oxygen. And that means that instead of the wood just going up in, into a furnace and you've got left with nothing, because it's not enough oxygen in the kiln, what happens is that you get charcoal, because it's not carbonized enough, right? So in other words, the charcoal can actually be burnt again. So you'll be surprised to hear that we do have coal being used in the medieval period. And we know that because when they've mined, when they've open cast mined in places like Derbyshire and Yorkshire, we've got evidence that they're open casting. They actually come across earlier workings, right, which are not 1900s. They go all the way back to the medieval period. And usually what you might find is a dead cat at the bottom of one of these mines. And that's what the medieval people used to do. They're very suspicious. So there was coal around, but charcoal gives you remarkably sometimes higher temperatures than coal. So charcoal kiln data can give us more and more ranges of scientific information. And the charcoal residues preserved in the remains of charcoal kilns are frequently used to understand the exploitation of woodlands. And what we're talking about is that what are people doing with their wood? Now, some people might just be using wood, a certain type of wood, like I don't know, like ash. Ash is a good burner, right? So they might be burning ash in their charcoal burners, right? And so okay, so we got that. They might be in their buildings and their homes. They might actually be using oak, right? In their hearths to heat the house, they might just be using, for example, hazel, or they might be using blackthorn or hawthorn. So it's very interesting to work out what these people are using over thousands and thousands of years. So the history and evolution of these structures and function of some types of charcoal pits are still poorly understood, but we're really starting to understand the visibility and understanding this wonderful landscape associated with charcoal burning. Now, I can tell you one really interesting thing, that years and years ago, we were actually collaborating with Swansea University, and they basically gave us one of their students who basically took some of my guys out and to look at charcoal burning sites at the Wentlug Woodland and Forest. I don't know if Roger was on that, but they were particularly looking for mounds, and that's what was all left of the charcoal burning. So again, comparing with the likes of Belgium and the Netherlands and Germany really helps us understand what's happening in other parts of the country and other worlds, and giving us that information. So before we have a break, right?
Well,
shut up, Roger. Before we have a break, Roger likes me picking on him, right? This is about a site known as Brock Hole in Cumbria. So charcoal, the second element, coal, meant charcoal. This first element is obscured, so we're not really sure what the name chark meant. The coal means burnt wood, so we're really not understanding what chark meant. The black porous residue consisting of one pure wholly of carbon obtained from partly burnt wood bones, has specified as wood or vegetable. So that's definition as the shorter in English dictionary. So you go. I'm gonna mention this now, and then we'll have some questions, and then we'll have a nice little 15-minute break. So people visiting Brockhall in 1992 in Cumbria noticed that it was a very diverse and involved landscape. And what they did in that woodland at Brockhall, based on the local archaeology, was to reconstruct some of these charcoal burners. And again, that's something that we'll have a little conversation about at the after the break. So here we go, and there. And Stop sharing. Right. Okay then. Right, guys. Are there any questions? Andy's put something on. Hang on. I mean, what's he put on? It says there's a theory that the Holy Family was related to King Arthur's family through the female line. So maybe your stalkers weren't so bonkers. And obviously, Andy just said it's a clamp.
No,
Yeah, it is a.
Judith said
It's
that.
me.
Judith said that. I said it's a clamp, referring to the pile.
King Arthur?
What, a clamp? Nothing. It was that you were referring to the pile of wood burning as a charcoal burning pile. It's a clamp. It's called.
Don't you mean a plank?
No, clamp.
Oh, clamp.
I'm talking about the King Arthur experts.
Ah, yes, definitely.
So obviously the ones cut into the
clamp.
ground are known as clamp kilns. The ones above are not.
Yeah.
So
The people still do that around here. But they use like a steel drum with a lid they put on it now. So.
I know what you mean. And you yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. Right, okay then. Right, Andy, any questions? Anything to say?
No, I was looking up what woods they used and all the rest of it, and it was saying any of the hardwoods are better. They get better. But I came across the you'd think wood, if you're burning wood and to make charcoal, you've got to burn it. Well, cure it. It's using the heat without the oxygen. You'd think it would have used up some of its energy, but it was saying that most normal wood is 5 to 8% energy you get out of it burning it, and charcoal is 28%, which is a massive difference. I never realized it was that much more efficient. Yeah, kind of makes us wonder why do we all have log fires? Why aren't we burning charcoal?
Yeah.
But somebody's got to produce the charcoal in the first place. Yeah.
Well, it used to be lots, didn't there? So.
Yeah, they did. So, Andy, what's the when you burn coal? So you're talking about the 28% for charcoal. What's it for coal?
I don't know. It didn't say what coal was. But I'll have a look, see if I can find out.
I think you should. Right. Anything from you, Emma?
No, thank you.
Judith?
No, nothing. It's very interesting. It's like the peat. I had no idea. I had no idea about the peat. I had no idea about these lime kilns, and I had no idea about this charcoal. It's all very interesting.
And somebody's going to come up with something else. I know they are. And they're not Margaret.
Well, I remember a year or two ago, we go to this annual conference in Ambleside, Archaeology Conference, and it's organised by the National Park Authority. And they did a whole thing about charcoal burning in the woodland, not far from here. I can't remember what it's called. But all of that area during the, I think it was the 13th century, was owned by Furness Abbey. And they controlled everything. And apparently, I think it was 2 years after the Battle of Bannockburn, the Scots came south and raided the area around Furness Abbey and went off with a great amount of iron. So Furness Abbey had to extend their area. Oh, Satterthwaite. There's a lot of charcoal burning was done in Satterthwaite in the forest there, and you can see quite a lot. You can see a lot, but you haven't mentioned slag. Whenever this man doing the lecture mentioned slag, it made me and my friend titter like silly schoolgirls.
Basically, I can remember I took two of my children out field walking one day, right? And I said, look, guys, on this field, we're looking for pottery and we're looking for slag, right?
Yeah.
And it would just be like my son would pick up a bit of slag and look at my daughter and say slag, and my look at my son and say slag. Oh God!
I know, it makes you go silly, doesn't it?
Have I ever told you? Have you ever told you about my one of my youngest children's predisposition with running up to molehills and saying no artifacts? And then I filmed her one day. She'd go, "No artifacts," and we go, "No artifacts." I taught my children well to hate archaeology. So there we go. So Anne.
No, I'm nothing to say. Thank you. No.
Roger.
What? Me?
Well, who else am I talking about?
Well, you're thinking stuff that I don't know what you're saying. All I heard was, "Oh, huge." I was going to ask about the lime kiln we'd seen at Barry Island once, which was a gather Victorian. Now, the lime kiln cooks limestone with charcoal in the
charcoal or coal.
later time, Victorian.
We were talking about peat with some examples, yeah.
Because I'm wondering if they were doing plenty of limestone around, but then there must evidence of charcoal burning in the general area there. It never mentioned it, or it never came up with anything.
In Barry,
way away somewhere.
In Barry, so obviously, the biggest problem is it's an understudied area. So what we've specifically got is that we've got all these lime kilns in South Wales, like we've got all these lime kilns in Cumbria, right, and in lots of other places. And it's just sad that nobody has ever really studied the charcoal burning localities. And because there would have been lots of them, because even though there's limited amounts of coal about, right, charcoal is going to be charcoal is going to be readily available if you can make it. Charcoal is shall I say a Richmond's coal, or is it actually, yeah, charcoal is a Richmond's coal, because we've made it. So yeah, so there's got to be places where we're making where we're charcoal burning across the whole of the landscape.
I might sound thick, but what's the process between the charcoal and the iron? What's the in-between bit that produces the iron?
Taking oxygen out.
It's just basically the reaction. So basically, there's certain formulas for creating steel and iron with adding charcoal, which would add more carbon. And this is really important to use charcoal. And some people who make different types of iron swear by just using charcoal and not coal.
Mm.
Yeah, because the iron ore is iron and oxygen, and it comes in different forms too. That's what the blast furnace was.
Yes.
And it reduces it down. The iron you get pours out, all sparkly and all this. But then the different alloys you get, steels, the low carbon alloys, special steels for electricity, which we used to make, being metallurgists, it changed, because in the old days you had puddling and wrought iron, which is raw and passed about, basically.
Yes.
The more sophisticated things to get a more standard product with additions sometimes of manganese and stuff, toughness and various things, silicon for electrical steels using transformers,
aluminium,
different characteristics.
Well.
And then stainless steel used the iron alloy with chromium, bit of nickel and stuff, to stop the rusting, which is what the chromium does in the different types of stainless steel. But essentially, that's what's happening. So it's a starting point, but the iron coming out of the furnace is a reduced iron, the ore, which is where you get the gas, CO, which it can be dangerous because the carbon's taken up the oxygen of the ore. And it produces mainly that there's not enough oxygen, so you got CO instead of CO2, carbon dioxide, which is a suffocating gas. CO is a gas that is absorbed by the blood instead of oxygen, glowing, and it kills you.
Oh yeah, you're right.
It was the case at Port Talbot, sometimes people were gassed. They were very, very careful, but it's such a lot of gas produced from the reduction process. But this is where it's crazy now. They're putting an arc furnace there, but you're still going to make the iron. from the ore, reduce the ore down. You can't go straight to steel.
No.
No.
No. Exactly. Anything from you, Gina?
No, thank you.
And David?
No, thank you.
I wanted to ask, did you all get your newsletters?
Yes, thank
Yes,
you.
thank you.
Good. All right, so we are going to have a little. We are going to have a break now. So we will be back. Obviously we've had a later start tonight, but I don't want to be going on too long tonight simply because yeah, I don't. Some of you don't appreciate going on till 10 o'clock. We'll be locking off at 9:30 anyway. So a few things to do. So let's have a little bit of a break. It's now 8:43. We'll be back about sort of 8:55. That'll do me.
Okay, right.
Okay.
This 19-year-old singer-songwriter Carl-Alessandro They lost out actually in really back in 2023. And a father, so that song is called Lighter. Just on actually. Break up the former. This. Follow Sandra.
Ooh.
Hmm. Right, let's crack on straight down to the undies. I hope you got your undies on, Rog.
Not tonight to keep fresh and cool.
Oh, you wear a kilt, do you?
No, I'm special trousers and stuff.
It's almost too hot for undies, isn't it?
Got to keep it all fresh and cool. No, so.
Oh God, Roger, do you know what? Sometimes I take it too far. That was definitely too far. You know, that was.
Well, I'm just trying to explain.
No,
so
no,
you know
Rog.
what's happening? I don't want to confuse you even more than you are already. I mean, you could, yeah, a thing, you know. So just trying to be careful and delicate.
Right, Roger, there's nothing careful and delicate about you. Really not. Really not.
Oh. We don't want to embarrass and upset the ladies with untoward chatter.
Well, there's only three true ladies in this class.
Yeah, you mean
What's the flight?
what?
The flight. What's that?
Fine.
The flight.
I'm looking at the image.
We're gonna hang on, we're gonna explain all that.
Oh dear.
Charcoal burning in 1992 at Brockhall, right?
Oh, you mean they did a demonstration there?
Yes.
Yeah. I wish I'd got that.
But it was a reconstruction. It was a reconstruction group called Reggio Anglorum, right?
Yeah.
So here we go. The first thing. First, why make charcoal? So this will answer a lot of things. The simple answer is that no other combustible substance generates the heat, an irregular heat, necessary for the forging of metals. By the definition, coal, charcoal, right? The process basically consists of burning or literally charring wood at a very slow rate, as demonstrated in front of us. Controlled rate, so that the combustion is never allowed to compete and complete and overtake the burning of the object, and thus turn the raw materials to ash. So in other words, this itself is your coal charcoal. This is achieved by controlling the amount of air involved in the reaction. In fact, restricting the amount of oxygen in the burning process, right? So if we go with if we go with this, right,
Mm.
what you do, well, these are like nice little examples. There's a nice example there, the French example. What so there we go. So you cover the wood or bundles of wood with what's known as a caboose of earth, a caboose, a caboose, a caboose of earth. The process takes about 24 to 30 hours for up to 4 tons of wood. The amount that they used in this process for the reconstruction in Cumbria's Brockhole, they used they used 3 or 4 tons. Well, I think they should be a bit more clear whether it's 3 or 4 tons, but say they used 4 tons of wood. They created 1 ton of charcoal.
How do they
Which, so in
ignite
other
these
words,
things, I wonder? The
that's the little trick. We're going to show you about the little trick, but not yet, Roger. You're jumping ahead
Okay,
too much.
just
Rod,
wondered.
be very careful. So this is basically one that's not using a clamp. Okay, this is not cut into the ground, right? But these ones
Oh,
are seen as clamps. Okay, these are clamps, or
Oh,
these more excessive clamps. Lighting the clamp. So in other words, you light it from the middle. I think that's what you wanted to hear, Roger. You light it from the middle.
middle,
So
yes.
back to this. So in other words, the advantage with the clamp is that you you shelter the burning a little bit more than rather being on the surface.
Right.
And obviously you get less undercurrents. So first they had to prepare the ground by removing the turf from a circle some 9 feet across and thoroughly mattocking up and sifting through the top several inches of soil for stones. If it's now this is interesting. This really complicated stuff. If a stone held any moisture, it could be prone to explode at the temperatures of the clamp, putting a fast burning hole in the clamp itself, meaning that the whole thing will set alight. This is known as a Farr's tent. And basically, this is another name for this is a pitstead or a pit steed. So in other words, this is so you've got to make sure that there's no stones there. I don't know if you've made a little sort of fire in your garden with stones and then the stones start to explode. You don't want stones about. So this was all reconstruction archaeology. They were trying to work out how the whole thing worked, right? So the next problem they encountered was the construction of a pile of wood that was self-supporting and would remain so when converted, right? So in other words, you need to keep the whole thing together. You don't want it to sort of go off on an angle and just burn out, right?
Yeah.
So what they had to do, they had to consult with industrial archaeologists, and there's one local guy. This name rings a bell. Mike Davis Shiel. Does that ring a bell, Andy? Shiel, Shiel. Anyway, is a local industrial archaeologist in 1992. And what they did was it was a trial and error, to be honest with you. And they really needed to sort of understand the process. So some of these words that you asked for a translation of, I think it was Margaret and Roger. So here we go. So having built our pile of wood around the central stake or motty peg, that thing there's a motty peg, right? That's where you burn it from. That's your, in other words, that's your igniter bit. That's where you ignite it. It burns from the center outwards, right? And basically, the motty peg should be quite a big motty peg, right? Which should go all the way down to the bottom, but they did a little version. So what they did,
What?
hang on, so what we got, yeah, the biggest problem that they had was getting rid of bracken in and around the area as well, because that was going to be a fire risk. A day and a half of digging and riddling to get rid of the stones, make sure the stones ain't there, had produced several piles of authentic clayish undersoil, right? So you wanted to burn it off the clay undersoil. You wanted a base, and this is why you have to dig up the clamp, technically. And basically, right, that clay itself is known as the SAMMEL, right? SAMMEL, which is the thing that you use to cover the wood. But there's also something useful you can do with the bracken, right? Instead of the bracken being a fire risk from around, what you do, you stack up the shanks of wood, and then you put bracken directly on top of the shanks of wood. You don't just discard it. And the SAMMEL, the clayish undersoil, that really rich clay, right, which you've already riddled, and it's got no stones in it, you put that on top. Right, so just a reminder, so the bracken piled over the wood, and the bracken keeps the wood together as well somehow. And this basically created, with the SAMMEL of clay on top, right, this created an airtight layer. And basically this whole thing, right, creates a little structure. Right now, there's something else which is obviously the pitstead. We've got the word pitstead. We don't need a reminder of that. So what you've done, you've cut into the ground, right? And what you've got a little lip. This isn't in all cases, right? You've got this little lip. I said earlier on, what you've got to do is you've got to sort of try and regulate the oxygen and try not to have too much wind blowing across the horizon, sort of blowing the whole thing away. But what you can do, you can draw up some of the oxygen from the flip, which goes around the outside. You got the flip, well, you got that on the plan. It's known as the flip. You've got this little gap, and this little gap can be maybe 6 inches off the ground, which is half a foot, right? Which allows only a small amount of air to enter the clamp. And after a while, the air is going to be so reduced because the weight of the whole thing sort of smoldering inside, that sort of vacuum at the bottom where you've got air coming in through the flip is going to be lessened, right? So you've got so little oxygen being burnt in this whole charcoal burning excavate, right? There's more, folks, right? So what you've got is they said a 5 foot high circular pile of wood covered now in bracken and earth, and you've got the motty peg. There it is. Now, the motty peg was withdrawn, and apparently they used a bit of a spear, right? And what you then do is you put some blazing coals underneath the motty peg, right? So you pull the motty peg out, right? And then in that hole where the motty peg is, above the central stake, which is going to burn, right? You put in some coals, some blazing coals, right? Or you could put some charcoal in there, which you've created earlier. And then after a considerable amount of tender loving care from everyone who had been involved, a roaring fire was going on inside, and the hole was packed with charcoal and sealed with turfs or capped off. So in other words, the motty peg is either put back in, right, or you just put turfs over where the motty peg is. You seal it up, right? You've got to make sure that it's smouldering, it's not burning away, right? It's not burning away. This is key to this whole process. And then, which isn't in this illustration, right? In another illustration, you've got these windbreaks, right? And this is really important. If you notice that one, right, there's no flip underneath, right? That this is just a surface one, right? There's no flip, right? But what they've done, they've created a windbreak. So this is very important. The windbreak is to stop any wind coming along and being drawn somehow into that anyway, even though it's sealed on the ground, right? You don't want any wind being drawn, because basically the charcoal burner will actually draw air into it. So that's how it's going to burn. So the windbreaks are placed around, and it's really important now. So we don't want the wind creating any more combustion, right? So in other words, what we've got, the clamp is actually sealed at the top, right? It's just sealing it now, right? So it's sealed. That's a good illustration. So it's sealed at the top. So in other words, what we got logistically, this is quite an onerous process. The SAML is sealed up there, and this is very interesting.
What flame?
What they're saying, temperature in there was up to 700 degrees C. So even outside, it was very, very hot. Very, very hot, they're saying. And then they said that the next unforeseen complication, as they're practicing with this, was that a burning clamp has to be watched continually until it is finished. So I don't know if you've seen those programs, and they've got people in the Forest of Dean, and they're there for like 30 odd hours, just sat next door to the charcoal burner, right? They've got to stay with it. This is because the roast is driving all the water out of the wood to turn it into charcoal, and therefore the 5-foot high pile of wood, the 4 tons of it, would then be reduced to 1 ton of charcoal, right? So when the 5-foot high pile of wood is reduced then down to 2 foot high, with this settling process, the delicately crafted, now this is key, airtight seal of the SAML, the lid on it, is prone to crumble, and any slight crack will admit too much air, meaning that half the clamp burns to a crisp. So in other words, this is the problem. You see that burn there? They've got to seal it. They've got to seal it. Sod of earth, they need to seal it, right?
Yeah,
So basically, they're talking about they're talking about that they've had to spend all this time with the furnace, right? They had to spend time with it. So before we actually go on, right, I wanted to mention this. This is some basically the Anglo. I mentioned some of this at the beginning. So the Anglo-Saxon word "col," C-O-L, coal, C-O-A-L, or col, C-O-L, often taken to mean coal, actually meant charcoal, right? So in other words, when you refer to coal, you're actually referring to charcoal, right? Because the original word for the original word for this material was charcoal, or coal, C-O-A-L. So they weren't referring to coal as in a coal mine, they were referring to charcoal. Does that make sense? So they've got some more Anglo-Saxon there. The screen pu usa coal on herd, may you be consumed as charcoal on the fire. Mineral coal was called sea coal. Now, in other words, coal that they're collecting off the beach is sea coal, which is naturally eroded, not mine coal, which is not charcoal. Charcoal is created by humans. Sea coal is naturally coal, which is being eroded from seams somewhere, because it was found on the beaches. Only the monks at Margam actually dug for it from about 1054. So in other words, we're looking at this whole thing now. So back to this. Back to more of this. Right. I'm probably going to go over a bit than I wanted to, but I'm still in the vogue, guys. So here we go. Phase 2. This is really important. Phase 2, cooling the 700 degrees C charcoal to a point where it wouldn't just burn into flames the minute it saw the light of day. So in other words, this is really important. As you're starting to take the SAML off, right, you need to be very careful that the first whiff of oxygen doesn't set the whole thing up. And as you're taking the SAML off, right, you know, you what you've got to really do is you've got to allow for it to cool down. Cooling it down involves 2 people. And what did you cool it down with? You cooled it down with water. So in other words, as you're breaking this SAML on top, the protective cover on the top, one would rake off a section of the baked SAML, right? Pour water on it, and the other saying, which is an actual terminology, saying, tipping, saying. So when you tip water on something. So you're saying, I'm saying you're a twonk. In other words, what you're saying, that you're tipping water on someone, right?
Yeah.
That's what saying means. Saying you tip water. So this all proved to be crucial. Since the rain had done much of our work for us, and we didn't need to seal it up for the next 24 hours, we had. So in other words, what they did, this is what we've got. We've got the charcoal cooling down, right? So they're saying that the roasted charcoal was complete. So that when you're creating charcoal, it's a roast. So
how they know when it's done properly?
Yeah, well, put it this way: it's Roger. When it's 5 foot, when it gets down to 2 foot, that's when you need to start taking the SAML off. You need water. You need to saying it. You need to add the water to it, right? And therefore, the whole thing is cooled down, right? And then when it's cooled down, it's charcoal ready to be used. So it took a whole day, even with adding water to it, for the whole thing to be cooled down. And here we go. It said then, you know, it's mostly damp at that stage, right? But then when you dry it out again, it's your perfect charcoal, right? So when they produced this in Cumbria, apparently, one of the local smithies, one of the local smithies in Cumbria said that this was good quality charcoal that they actually made. And what they then did was they went to use the charcoal in a local blacksmith, and nothing went to waste. And even the pitstead, which was now more like a mud wrestling sumo area, and an ex-pitstead. This is another term. An ex-pitstead in the ground is known as a scrow, SCROW. And then now this is a really interesting point. If you're digging out the clay to create the SAML, right, underneath that clay, right, is another layer of clay, right? So as you've added water to the charcoal, right, it's mixed with the clay, and they're saying that clay then is ideal with the mixed water and bits of charcoal, right? What's left of the charcoal that hasn't been taken away, right? That's ideal for making pottery. So the charcoal clamp, from digging a hole to the whole process, had cost 5 days. It had involved a lot of people, but it demonstrated that we can do this, and that it's a process that, even though they're doing it very differently, charcoal burners in the Forest of Dean, it's one of those, it's one of those processes, it's one of those technologies that you can see is very effective today. So what they're saying with the Motti peg, right? What you're basically lifting up the Motti peg, this Motti peg A, and then you put in charcoal in there, but you cannot let that burn just like that. So what you've got to do, you've got to cap it off, right? Because if you let that burn, the whole thing will just go to ashes, and you won't end up with any charcoal at all. God, that was a really interesting thing I'm talking about. So this is more the charcoal burning today, because people do burn charcoal today in these original ways still today, and there's still charcoal burners in the Forest of Dean. It's well sought after material, to be honest with you. I think these obviously photographs taken from quite some years ago. But this is the process still used today, and obviously you're going to have to cover. You're going to have to put a SAML over that where that guy's standing there with the windbreaks behind. And this is from an old book from the 1800s from France. And this is a SAML around the outside, which isn't in a hole. This is not in a clamp like the ones that they demonstrated in Cumbria. And now. This is quite important, right? Because there's a lot of smoke exuding from the furnace, the charcoal burner, and you've got to make sure that that isn't smouldering from burning itself, right? And if there's any cracks in there, right, then the whole thing, as we've demonstrated, will just go up in flames. And you've got to try and reduce the flow of oxygen by using windbreaks. So that's obviously really good charcoal, and obviously, even though we've said that within the charcoal burning mound it's 700 degrees C, as Andy put me to charge, and we mentioned about the peat in a peat burner's furnace. When we're producing lime, and when I say peat burners, a lime kiln when you use peat, that's what I meant. And obviously, what you do is that the thermal properties of, say, a lime kiln, that's going to increase the temperature of burning the peat from 200 to 300 to 400 to 500 to 600, and maybe get up to 900 degrees C, right? With bellows, on the other hand, charcoal, you can get up to temperatures in excess of your 1000s, 200, 300, and 400 degrees C, which is towards the upper end of 1400 degrees C. You've actually got the ability to smelt iron. There they are. This is another gentleman in the Forest of Dean, and he's bundling all that wood up, and obviously, as we know, the terms are the shanks of wood getting ready to. And if you've noticed, these are bundles of wood pointing upwards rather than flat. They're all pointing. They're all pointing vertically rather than horizontally. That's really key. So what I wanted to do tonight was I also wanted to bring you something else as well. Just one last thing. And I did mention last week that we would do a little bit of archaeology as well involving this lake. This is known as Llyn Cerrig Bach. And Llyn Cerrig Bach is up on Anglesey. Llyn Cerrig Bach. But basically, Llyn Cerrig Bach is a rather interesting votive lake, dating from the Iron Age in the final centuries BC. And this lake itself, there we go, and there's a runway next to it now today. This lake itself, the western edge of Ynysmore, Anglesey, it is part of a wider coastal wetland landscape of small lakes, bogs, rock outcrops and islets, fondly visited by Lloyd George. The wetland landscape was first seriously impinged upon in 1942 with the construction of RAF Valley, which is where the Prince of Wales used to serve, just to the south, and they levelled sand dunes. However, it was not until airfield expansion in 1943 when peat was systematically excavated using a drag line from the wetland margins to place over to stabilise the stand, that they actually come across treasures, real treasures. And basically, this is the Llyn Cerrig Bach hoard. And the treasures of Llyn Cerrig Bach are more than just these. Indeed, the peat from several lakes had been fully excavated and spread across the intervening spaces of the runways and was in the process of being harrowed and seeded. So what you've got is this was originally brought to the attention back in 1943, amazing enough, of the National Museum of Wales curator known as Cyril Fox. So the finds at Llyn Cerrig Bach are intriguing, and we'll just mention a little bit about this and notice the good preservation of the iron. You've obviously got an iron sickle there, and what you've got as well, you've got this wonderful object as well, this wonderful tool. The finds are primarily, they think, military, and included 11 swords, 8 spearheads, and parts of a parade shield. And whatever these were they offerings to the gods? Equipment from several chariots was present. And again, this is not all the image, this is just some of them. Equipment from several chariots were also present, both the harnesses and parts, and the rest of the chariot. Chariots that seemingly would have used wheeled, obviously back then. The dates of the finds are also of interest. Some of the swords are of, and you could, that's the sword there, that's the sword, that's the sword, and that looks very familiar, like a sword. Oh God, a bar, Iron Age bar currency, the one on the left there. That looks very similar to that, doesn't it? Rather than a sword. We discussed that in quite detail. Now, these themselves date from around 100 years BC, but some probably date from around AD 60. So this suggests that the lake developed its importance as an important Iron Age deposition, a landscape, and also probably going up to the ages of Rome as well, when the Romans are taking an interest on Anglesey. So this is when, as I say, these are just some of the objects that are actually on display. And there are various descriptions. Some of these are on display at the St. Fagans National Museum, History Museum, and there's some on display in Oriel on Anglesey. So thinking about, there's lots of descriptions of this landscape, and so I'm just going to go with two and some of the finds that they're talking about. And again, this is the landscape that we're talking about. So they're saying the Llyn Cerrig Bach assemblage is one of the most important collections of that Latin art from near Switzerland. Metalwork discovered in the British Isles. It came to light during, as we know, in 1943. A total of, wait for it, 180 iron and copper objects. So this is copper. Allow art and 180 objects that they've actually found. And thinking about more of a sort of side-on look at this. Hang on. More of a side-on look at this from Anglesey with this image here. Let's just see what Toby Driver of the Royal Commission on Ancient Historical Monuments Wales says about this in 2023. This is his words about votive lakes and what these artifacts might mean. So the Iron Age landscape was alive with places of religious and sacred significance. The hoarding of prestige metalwork, including swords, weapons, and valuable metal worker scrap, had been taking place all the way back in from the Bronze Age into the Iron Age across Britain, Ireland, and wider continental Europe. The conspicuous deposits of metalwork became ever more associated with watery places. The bends of major rivers, natural springs, the dark waters of upland lakes, and the dangerous pools of mist-shrouded bogs. Clean Kerrigbach on Anglesey was discovered during airfield construction in 1943, when peat was mechanically dragged out of the wetland to stabilize coastal sand dunes around the newly built runways. A large hoard of metalwork dating to the last 3 centuries before the Roman conquest included swords, spears, shields, and chariot fittings. The location of the finds suggests that they were thrown into the dark waters from a rock platform on the lake edge. The position of the lake, very close to the western seaways off Anglesey, may suggest that this intensely used sacred location was known far and wide to seafaring visitors and other people. And they're basically saying that this is rather interesting as well. If we go back to these images, it's a note from Operation Nightingale. Field work by Operation Nightingale. Basically, it's the archaeological charity that retrains people who've been injured in warfare by the military, and they get them to do archaeology. And basically, somebody that Claire knows is involved in this, or used to be. In 2024, a team of military personnel and veterans from Operation Nightingale, led by Richard Osgood, he's been doing it for quite a long time, of the Defence Infrastructure Organisation, and with involvement from various agencies in Wales, returned to RAF Valley to carry out metal detector surveys under controlled conditions to assess whether further Iron Age metalwork survived undiscovered in the areas between the runways where peat from the lake had originally been spread. So what they're saying, the peat that had been brought up, they didn't go through it, and now they're thinking that there might be something in it now. This was the first time that the long-held theory that other treasure may survive in peat spread between the runways had been followed up by archaeologists. Following 2 days of survey, a bridle bit and turret ring, which is part of a chariot rain guide, with decorative red enamel inlay, was recovered and classed as treasure trove. And finally, they're looking to do more research at this locality as part of Operation Nightingale. Apparently, it took place between the 11th and the 14th of April this year. I don't know anything more about the findings, but it's really interesting to think that more things might have been found at this wonderful locality where they're finding these beautiful bronze and iron and bronze objects. Usually bronze, when it's been in peat, comes out looking like gold, to be honest with you. I've mentioned that before, and this is the landscape they're talking about. So what we're going to do, we're going to call that a day now. Hopefully you've all enjoyed that, and there's been quite a few things in there. Back to my big black cat Morgoth, right, who's waiting for me. So I'm going to be driving home after that, and I'm going to be back down here as well. I'm going to get back to Barry now, and hopefully Michelle's put the animals in West Wales, so we'll see. So right, let's work out what I'm doing there. Off. Right, okay then. Let's see if there's any questions. We'll go with David first. Anything you want to say, David?
No, thank you. Good night, all.
Bye, David.
Good night, David.
David.
See you soon.
Next week.
Bye.
Night, David. Night. Take care. Normal time next week, 7 o'clock, by the way, everybody.
Okay.
Okay.
Normal time. Right. Okay, Dirty Rog.
No, I'm fine, thanks. Interesting.
Okay, good. You know why they call him Dirty Rog, don't you? I might tell you someday, Margaret. Margaret, anything you want to say?
It's such a long process, is the charcoal burning.
Mm.
So is burning lime.
I was looking up when the first charcoal burning was done, and it was done by the Hittites.
Yes.
not charcoal burning, but metal working. But
and they would have needed charcoal. Yes.
But would that have been from was it meteoritic?
No,
iron?
I think the Hittites. I'm sure the Hittites are looking at iron at that stage.
They did charcoal burning, did they?
Yeah, they would have. I'm looking this up.
BC.
Hittite. Hang on. Yeah, Hittite. They were there are Hittite iron swords. So yes, they were able to create iron in the Hittite kingdom, which was in central Turkey.
That's just astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah, these were quite early, and when they come across the Greeks, not the Greeks, when they come across the Egyptians didn't know what to do with them. And you know what? That came up straight away. And Hittite charcoal.
Blimey.
But
they must.
Yeah, it looks like
by accident, mustn't it? You know, they
it
would.
Looks like that. Yeah, it looks. Yeah, exactly. We haven't done anything like that. It looks like some of the iron and the copper amalgams would have needed the use of charcoal by the looks of this. So yeah. So anything else, Margaret?
Well, I just wonder if they looked at meteorites and just worked out what the elements were and went from there. It just seems extraordinary that they came up with iron by making charcoal. They must have been intent on doing something else. It's an accident, wasn't it?
It's all about things getting a bit carried away. So you might actually have it's happened to me. Yeah, you've got a garden, right, and you've got a garden fire. As somebody chucks a can of an aluminium can on there, right, and the next thing is you're clearing away the fire. There's a big blob of aluminium in the middle of the fire, and we know that that's going to happen, right? But this is what happens when you have intense heat. So this is what would have happened. So it's not surprising, but it's the way when we're talking about temperatures getting higher and higher and higher and higher, and eventually various things are going to burn. Your limestone's going to burn, your copper's going to burn, your iron's going to burn. All these things are going to burn. So yes.
That's quite a dangerous process, isn't it?
To be honest with you, what they used to say is that what they used to say is it's far better to work down a mine in the 1800s than it is to work in any of these agriculture, because charcoal burning is technically an agricultural process.
Yeah.
So it is because
mind-boggling, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
It really is.
Exactly. Okay, if there's nothing else from you, Margaret. Anne, what about you?
Anne was asleep.
Yeah.
Anne had nodded off.
All right. Okay then. Drina, anything from you?
No, thank you. It's very interesting.
Good. Thank you very much. And Emma?
Yeah, none for me, thanks.
Anne, are you still there?
She's woken up.
Yeah, she's woken up. Anne, have you got any questions?
No. I fell asleep.
Okay. Okay. So we asked. So who have we got left? We've got Andy. Anything?
Yeah, I've got those energy values for the burning of coal and wood. Wood is
Give it to us.
14 to 18 megajoules per kilogram. You don't need to worry about what it's measured in, but just the numbers: 14 to 18. Coal can be 8.3 to 33.5, depending on what kind of coal it is. and charcoal is 29. So charcoal is more consistent and more reliable and very much more efficient than certainly ordinary wood. Yeah, that some coals can be richer, but you've got to have the right ones. Yeah, and I don't know which ones come from whether they're available on the surface or whether you've got to mine it, in which case that didn't happen. So but interesting. I didn't look up peat. Peat they said was the same as wood. So but I think was it burning at was it 300 to 600 or something like that?
Yeah, I always put low, but yeah, that's right. It's quite low. Low.
Unless it's in a furnace. Yeah,
exactly. Anyway, really appreciate that, Andy.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
My pleasure. We asked Julia, didn't we? Julie?
Yes.
No, didn't ask me.
Oh,
very offended.
Julie,
quick, ask Judith.
No, there's nothing I wanted to say. No.
Judith, that's the one. Not Julia, Judith. Well, I got a 2-hour journey home, so hopefully
that'll be fun.
That'll be well. I got to get them. This is going to really upset Anne, right? I've got to go to a McDonald's on the way back.
Oh no! The calorific value that you get out of that's just really not worth it.
They do salads.
Oh yeah, I'm not going to get those calories out of that either.
Nobody goes to McDonald's for a salad.
Good point.
Well, they do if they're pretty sad. You're gonna love this, right? I can't say what production it was with, other than them having a fire there today. I turned up and yesterday my booker said, right, we want you to dress. We want you to bring a selection of your most grubbiest, dirtiest clothes to work in this, to be in this thing, right? And I basically turned up in the clothes I was wearing, and they said, that's ideal.
Perfect. Yeah. Hey, you're going to be careful. You're going to get typecast here, Carl.
Yeah.
The problem is, I have been typecast. It's like I seem to be an absolute nut job in these things, and that's what I get. I basically had an invite. It was like, right, are you doing this? And I said, yeah, I'm doing it. All right, yeah, that's fine.
And sheep shearing,
Yeah.
And sheep shearing, yeah. Oh, thanks, Andy. Thanks. Yeah, it's great.
Looking after
on my epitaph, it will be actor known for sheep shearing, and somebody will change that, won't they?
Yeah.
And that'll be you, Andy. That's your job.
And playing then, women. Yeah.
Oh, hang on a minute! Stop it! And then being an idiot. Yeah, great.
No, I think that's a very broad range there, Carl. So I think that shows quite a versatility. Nut
job, sheep shearing, playing women.
Good CV.
It looks good in gingham.
Oh, shut up, you.
Right.
All right, then we'll call it a night. Anyway, many thanks for your support. Same time next week, 7 o'clock, and we'll end just after 9. So don't worry for you, Anne. Anyway, night, Anne, Trina, Margaret, Emma, Judith, Andy, and Roger, and Jim Bob.
Thank you, Carl. Good night, all.
Bye.
Bye.
Night, folks. Night. It's only me. I don't know who else is there. Let's close this down. Right, so I don't know who we got there. I've got a long journey back to Barry and dodgy git. Iron was grown via reaction chemistry in Irish bogs. You are dead right. And many thanks, and don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube. And okay. And we're just gonna find a McDonald's. Flipping out. Right, okay. All right. It's only me. So chat. What was the chat here? Right. Chat 1, chat 2, chat 3, chat 4, chat 5, chat 6. Oh, on chat 7, Judith said there's a theory that the Holy Family was related to King Arthur's family through the female line. So maybe your stalkers weren't so bonkers Hands in the air, smiley face. That's from Judith. And then after that, at 8:27, and he says it. What's that mean? It? Oh, it. It's called a clamp. So clamp, yeah, they were good clamps. So we've got Judith's methods being bonkers. And it's called a clamp. Anyway, I've got to go, folks. I'm really tired. And I'm going to close down the window. Diolch yn fawr. Nos da chi. Golach chi eto. Ymor o hyd. And 1, 2, 3, 4.